Hello, today I will be presenting my final project for which I examined federal policy in the United States pertaining to asylum, with particular focus given to a proposed bill entitled the Asylum Seeker Protection Act. So this slide just details some early laws pertaining to asylum and immigration restrictions in the United States. The Page Act and the Chinese Exclusion Act were the first legislative pieces designed specifically to restrict the type of immigration coming into the United States, and eventually quota systems for immigrants fleeing persecution became the norm, and these quotas were designed to discriminate against certain immigrants coming from various ethnic backgrounds. And after World War II, the Displaced Persons Act of 1948 was enacted and then the UN, which was newly formed at the time, recognized the rights of refugees to seek asylum, which the U.S. signed on to. And from there, the Refugee Act of 1980 was enacted, and all kind of in that mix, the Immigration and Nationality Act was enacted as well. And per the UN protocol regarding refugees, a refugee is defined as a person who is unable to return to their home country and who cannot obtain protection in that country on account of race, religion, nationality, or membership in a particular social group or political opinion. And under both US and international law, anyone who enters the United States is entitled to apply for asylum. So despite this mandate that anyone who enters the US is entitled to apply for asylum, under the Trump administration, asylum seekers have faced intense scrutiny and obstacles in seeking protection in the United States. And a couple of examples of policy that's been particularly harmful to asylum seekers is the zero tolerance policy enacted in 2018, which is essentially an effort to ramp up criminal prosecution of people caught entering the United States without documentation. And this policy is what has caused the family separation that's happening at the border right now. And additionally, the migrant protection protocols, otherwise known as the Remain in Mexico policy, essentially require that asylum seekers at the border be returned to Mexico while their asylum applications are pending. And this is problematic for a whole host of reasons. And in addition to this, COVID-19 has been used as a justification to indefinitely suspend the asylum process, making it nearly impossible for asylum seekers to win protection in the US right now. And so now I'm going to talk about a piece of proposed legislation that's called the Asylum Seeker Protection Act. The Asylum Seeker Protection Act was introduced in the House on May 10th of 2019, and this bill would effectively prohibit the use of federal funds to implement or enforce the migrant protection protocols that I mentioned before. And this bill was referred to the Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship on June 26th of 2019, and it is still awaiting further action. This bill was introduced by Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who's a Democrat from Texas, and the act is co-sponsored by 72 representatives in the House, all of whom are Democrats. And that includes all the members of the squad: Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ayanna Pressley, pictured here. In addition to the support from Democratic members of the House, the Asylum Seeker Protection Act is also endorsed by various pro-asylum and pro-immigration interest groups, such as the ACLU, the Hope Border Institute, Kids in Need of Defense, the Southern Border Communities Coalition, the Latin America Working Group, and the Washington Office on Latin America, among others. Because this bill was written effectively to cut off federal funding to the MPP policy, many Republican elected officials, as well as right-leaning and right-wing interest groups, oppose the Asylum Seeker Protection Act. And just actually, polls show that despite the Trump administration's anti-immigration policy position, a majority of U.S. governors, as well as the majority of Americans, both Republican and Democrat, support continued refugee resettlement as of January 2020. However, public opinion has shifted slightly since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Media coverage of asylum really reflects the increasing political polarization of the issue of immigration more broadly. And popular media outlets often cover conditions at the U.S.-Mexico border in actions such as family separation, zero tolerance, and MPP. But the nature of coverage is very much dependent upon the perspective of the media outlet. And the Asylum Seeker Protection Act itself has not really received a lot of substantial media attention. So at this time, COVID-19 and the threat to public health and the nation's economy that it presents is really at the center of most public policy conversations right now. And the implementation of the Asylum Seeker Protection Act has kind of fallen to the wayside, and it seems somewhat unlikely at this point, though further action is still set to take place. And the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration could represent a really major shift in immigration policy and promoting protections for asylum seekers. President-elect Joe Biden has stated definitively that he is committed to undoing Trump's damage to the U.S. immigration system and to reasserting America's commitment to asylum seekers and refugees. So overall, through my research, my recommendations for policy going forward are ending the migrant protection program, possibly through enacting the Asylum Seeker Protection Act, but it really just needs to go. It's a detrimental policy in terms of protecting asylum seekers. And as well as that, ending the zero tolerance policy on immigration and strengthening access to channels for asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. And furthermore, we need to enact policy that will reunite the families that have been separated as a result of the zero tolerance policy on immigration. So in summation, the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration could be a really critical turning point in regards to asylum policy, and the new administration might represent new hope for the implementation of the Asylum Seeker Protection Act, but only time will tell. And given the growing polarization of immigration and asylum at the southern border and the threat posed by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we can only hope that the Biden-Harris administration can keep its promise to protect asylum seekers and reverse the damaging immigration and asylum policies that have been enacted during the Trump administration.